Hi everyone, welcome to the lecture number 19, the sixth lecture on labor market equilibrium. So far, we have discussed about the labor market outcomes in a competitive environment, discussed about how wage and employment is decided in a perfectly competitive labor market, and these outcomes in a competitive environment, how it is the most efficient way of allocating the resources. Further, we discussed about the impact of tax and subsidies, how this tax and subsidies they impact the outcome of this labor market and distorts some kind of efficiency in the labor market, which leads to a deadweight loss to the economy at aggregate. We discussed about the cobweb model, where we discussed that how the lag effect of the change in the demand and supply creates a form of cobweb in the labor market. In this lecture, we are going to discuss about the labor market outcomes in non-competitive environment. In particular, we will discuss about the case of monopsony, and in our subsequent lectures, we will discuss about the labor market outcomes in a situation of monopoly. Monopsony in the labor market refers to a situation where there is a single buyer, typically a large employer or industry that has significant power to influence wage and employment level in the economy. So, in a monopsonist labor market, the employer faces an upward sloping supply curve for the labor, which means it must increase wages to attract additional workers. So, this results in the employer paying a lower wage than it would in a perfect competitive labor market, which may lead to lower overall employment and potential efficiency in the labor market at aggregate. So, monopsony power can arise due to so many factors like barriers to entry, geographical isolation or industry concentration. So, let us discuss some of the properties of this monopsony labor market. The first property of this monopsony labor market, as I said, there is a single buyer. So, being a single buyer in the labor market, this particular firm or this industry have the absolute power to buy the labor services from the workers at its discretion. So, sometimes it may happen there will be a discretionary monopsonist. So, we will discuss about those situations where there is the monopsonist is a discretionary monopsonist, or sometimes it may happen that the monopsonist is a non-discretionary monopsonist. So, first property is there is the only single buyer exists in the labor market. Second property is the supply curve of this monopsonist is upward sloping. So, when we say supply curve is upward sloping, unlike in a perfect competitive market where the supply curve of labor is horizontal, in a monopsonist the supply curve is upward sloping, which means that if the employer wants to hire more workers, it must offer higher wages to attract additional employees. So, therefore, the supply curve of this monopsonist is upward sloping. Third property is the monopsonist is having the power to set the wage. So, monopsonist is a wage setter. When we say monopsonist is a wage setter, being a monopsonist, it has the ability to set the wages below the level that would prevail in a perfect competitive labor market. This is because the individual workers have limited alternative job opportunities, and due to the lack of competing employers, the monopsonist has the power to set the wages. Further, in a monopsonist situation, the informations are imperfect in nature. Workers may have imperfect information about the job opportunities or wage level, in other sectors or other locations, limiting their ability to negotiate higher wages or seek alternative employment. So, which leads to some kind of information is not symmetric, or there is some imperfect information, because of which this monopsonist has some power to set the wage. Another property is that being a monopsonist, he can distort market outcomes. So, there is some potential for the market distortion under a monopsonist. Monopsonist power can lead to market distortion, like lower overall employment level and reduce workers' welfare compared to what it would have happened in a competitive environment. So, this can result in inefficiency and misallocation of resources in the economy. So, which may lead to some kind of market distortion. Another property of monopsonist is there is some barriers to entry. Now, monopsonist may benefit from this barrier to entry, like high startup costs, regulatory hurdles, or patented technologies, which limit the ability of the new firms to enter into the market and compete for the labor. So, there is some barrier to entry in that way. Another property is the geographical isolation. Sometimes it may happen that this geographical isolation or concentration of industries in specific region can contribute to this monopsonistic labor market conditions, particularly when we say in a rural areas or some small town dominated by a single employer. So, in those cases this geographical isolation may lead to some kind of monopsonistic behavior in the labor market. Overall, the characteristics of monopsonistic labor market reflect the unequal power dynamics between employer and worker, which leads to the suboptimal outcomes in terms of wage and employment level and the resource allocations in the economy. Therefore, policymakers may intervene to mitigate these negative effects of monopsony power through like antitrust regulations, labor market reforms, or initiatives to promote competition and workers' mobility. So, these kind of interventions by the policymakers could lead to lower down this market distortion, and this may lead to better allocation of resources. So, in our discussion we will discuss about how certain policy implications interventions can do some better allocation of resources when there is some monopsonistic power in the labor market exist. There are two types of monopsonist firm. One is a perfectly discriminating monopsonist and a non-discriminating monopsony. So, when first we will talk about this perfectly discriminating monopsony. A perfectly discriminating monopsony is a theoretical concept in the labor economics, where a single employer has perfect information about the productivity and the reservation wages of the individual workers. So, in this situation, the monopsonistic employer can offer each worker a wage equal to their marginal productivity, capturing the entire surplus generated by the workers' employment. So, as a result, the wage paid to each worker reflects their specific contribution to the firm's profit and maximizing the employer's economic rent. So, to understand how this perfectly discriminating monopsonist works and what will be the labor market outcomes, we have considered this basic demand and supply framework, where if you look at this graph, on the x axis we have taken employment, on the y axis we have taken wage, and the first property is that of this perfectly discriminating monopsony is that the monopsony hires the workers at their marginal cost, which means firm is aware of that what is the reservation wage of each workers in the market. So, when firm hires would like to hire 10th worker, the firm is going to give him the wage rate W10. So, at this wage rate, this 10th worker is going to enter into the labor market. If he wants to hire or the 30th worker in the labor market, then he has to pay the wage rate W30. So, the perfectly discriminating monopsony is having the information that what exactly the reservation wage of these individual workers. So, he pays additional workers at their reservation wage. When he is going to add one more worker, when he is going to add the 11th worker, he is going to pay the wage rate W11, that is the reservation wage of the 11th worker. So, by doing so, the supply curve of the monopsonist firm is upward sloping. So, the firm is hiring the workers at their marginal cost. Now, being a monopsonist in the labor market, the firm is having the competitive environment in the product market. So, the demand function, the demand for labor is completely governed by the value of marginal product of labor. So, that is why this demand function for the labor, demand for the labor for this particular firm is governed by the value of marginal product of labor. So, regardless of whether the firm operates in a competitive environment or not, a profit maximizing firm would hire the workers up to the point where the value of the last worker hired equals to the cost of hiring the last worker. So, a perfectly discriminating monopsony will then hire up to the point where the last worker's contribution to the firm's revenue equals to the marginal cost of the labor. So, if you put it differently, then market equilibrium occurs at a point A, where the supply equals to demand, and the perfectly discriminating monopsonist hires E star workers, which is exactly the same employment level that would have been observed if the labor market were in a competitive environment. So, the wage W star is not the competitive wage. W star wage is the wage at which the E star worker is going to work at this wage rate. So, W star wage rate is the reservation wage rate of E star worker. So, it is the wage rate that monopsonist must pay to attract the last worker hired. So, all other workers receive lower wages, with each other receiving his or her reservation wage. So, 10th worker is receiving his reservation wage W10, 30th worker is receiving his reservation wage W30, and the last worker is getting the wage rate which is W star is his reservation wage. So, in a perfectly discriminating monopsony, each workers get the wage rate as per their reservation wage and as per their marginal cost. So, an example of a perfectly discriminating monopsony would be like a small town hospital in a rural areas where it is the only major employer. So, hospital is the only major employer. Let us say hospital has the detailed information about the skills, experience and the productivity levels of all potential nurses in that area. So, the hospital could use this information to offer each nurse a wage precisely equal to their individual productivity level, capturing entirely of the surplus generated by their employment. So, by paying each nurse their marginal productivity, the hospital maximizes its profit while ensuring it attracts that and retains the necessary nursing staffs. However, in reality, such perfect information and discrimination are unlike due to practical constraints and ethical consideration. So, the economic impact of a perfectly discriminating monopsony can be significant and has implications for both workers and in a broader context in the at the aggregate level in the economy. So, what happens when there is a perfectly discriminating monopsony is there? There is serious efficiency losses happens to the economy. While a monopsonist employer maximizes its own profit by paying each worker their marginal productivity, this practice can lead to a loss of economic efficiency. The workers may be paid less than their contribution to the overall productivity, resulting a misallocation of resources and deadweight loss to the economy. Further, when the workers are being paid at different level at their reservation wage, so there is an inequality. This may lead to some kind of income inequality in the economy. A perfectly discriminating monopsony aggravates income inequality, since the workers are paid based on their individual productivity. So, those with higher skills or productivity level may earn significantly higher wages than others, which may widen the gap between high and low income workers in the economy. Further, presence of a perfectly discriminating monopsony leads to some kind of workers exploitation. Workers in a perfectly discriminating monopsony may have little bargaining power and may be exploited by the employer, especially if alternative job opportunities are limited. So, this can lead to dissatisfaction among the workers and potential social unrest in the economy. Further, the presence of this perfectly discriminating monopsony can distort labor market, leading to suboptimal outcome such as lower employment levels and reduce the overall welfare. And this monopsonist power of the employer may also discourage the potential competitor from entering the market, further limiting the job opportunities of the workers. It has significant impact on the innovation and productivity in the economy. So, in the long run, a perfectly discriminating monopsony may stifle innovation and productivity growth. So, being a monopsonist which pays lower wages and reduces incentives for the workers to improve their skills or invest in the education and training can hinder the technological progress and economic development. Overall, while a perfectly discriminating monopsony may benefit the employer in the short term by maximizing profit, its economic impact can be detrimental to the workers' efficiency and overall welfare in the long run. So, the policymakers may consider the intervention such as like antitrust regulations, labor market reforms, or measures to promote competition to mitigate these negative effects of this monopsonistic power. Perfectly discriminating monopsonists are often considered an extreme case and may not exist in reality due to information asymmetries and transaction costs. So, this concept contrasts with the standard monopsonist situation, where the employer faces uncertainties about the workers' productivity and must set wages based on average market conditions rather than individual characteristics. So, in our next lecture, we will discuss about the labor market outcomes in a non-competitive environment, where the firm is non-discriminatory in nature, however, having some monopsonist power. Thank you.